This is Fear and Trembling by Søren Kierkegaard. Now, the first time I tried to read this philosophical work, I was 50 pages in and, I just had to give up. Now, I'm gonna have to explain why this is. Normally, I, as a reader, one of my rules is if I start a book, I have to finish it, no matter what. Because every book deserves a second chance and so on, right? Every book deserves to be read. And it happens very rarely when I just put a book down because it is just impossible. Either it's boring or incomprehensible. So the first time I was 50 pages in and I just didn't get it, right? And partly because, the way Søren writes, I should say his style, the way he expresses himself, you know, his some of his sentences here are like half a page, so a sentence is a whole paragraph or even longer. What you might have a difficulty with is the way he expresses himself, his writing style. The commas aren't where they should be. Again, long ass sentences. So that is why I put it down the first time. But now I finished it, and I'm gonna be honest, I didn't understand everything, obviously. Like, you can tell right off the bat that Kierkegaard is incredibly big brained. Right? Incredibly, his education is in another galaxy, right? But anyway, Fear and Trembling deserves to be read, even if you don't understand everything. It has to be read because his mind, and most of all, I really haven't seen anybody talk about Soren's, let's call it, dry sense of humor, or his wit that is sterile, right? This man, not only is he incredibly intelligent, but he has, a dry wit that I think it can pass over your head if you're not paying attention. And let me tell you this, you have to be focused when you're reading this man's work. You have to concentrate, because if your mind wanders for a second, you're gonna miss what he's trying to say, and you're gonna have to read that fucking long ass paragraph again, right? Yeah, but I haven't heard people talk about his sense of humor, which is just straight to the point. He just, throws his jabs and that's it. It's incredible that it's so direct, so honest, so simple, and so wonderful that the fact that this guy has a sense of humor kind of is overlooked, right? The way he just attacks, his contemporaries, in the early and mid 1800s. He keeps talking about this era and this generation, etc., etc., and he just, throws shade. He's roasting his own people, and for good reason, right? Because he was the outsider and he could see exactly what society is all about, right? Ergo, he could tell the difference between bullshit and actual progress or whatever, right? Even if you haven't read any philosophical work ever, right? I haven't read, a lot of philosophers and their work, and even before I began reading seriously, which was like 10 years ago, Even before I began reading, I had heard about Søren Kierkegaard and Nietzsche and all these others, right? So of course he's very impactful because he has things to say, right? I mean, the title alone, Fear and Trembling, that's all you need to do. That's all you need to do to get my attention. When I saw this title, I knew that I had to read this thin book, right? And I said that, his writing style is a bit clunky. It's a bit difficult to read. But on the other hand, I mean, there are some passages here that really shine, that really catch your attention, and they are tremendous. And I'm probably gonna quote a couple of them by the end of this video, right? But this little book, for the most part, deals with trying to prove that Abraham in the Bible, Abraham was forced by God to kill his son to prove his faith, and everybody, and at the last moment when Abraham was gonna, kill his own son as a sacrifice for God, God said, nah, chill, bruh, it's good, bruh. So, and of course, Abraham is, acclaimed and beloved as a hero for, having this unshakable faith in God and doing whatever God commands, even if it is sacrificing your own son. And Kierkegaard, from what I gather, in this book, he makes the claim, which I support, that, uh, Abraham is not a hero. He should not be acclaimed and celebrated because he's not a hero. He's actually a murderer because he was going to kill his own son to prove his faith to God, and that makes him a murderer. If you believe in ethics, if you believe in morality and standards, principles, convictions, but mostly, moral ethics, it's pretty obvious that Abraham is a murderer, or would have been a murderer if God hadn't intervened, right? So this is the main subject matter. It drags on a bit too much. He gives a lot of examples, a lot of perspectives, etc., etc. Of course, it is a philosophical work through and through. And this is what I want to talk about because, he is so serious. I mean, you can tell from his writing that he was straight up dead ass serious when he wrote this, and I think this is a shortcoming or a defect or a debilitation, right? This is the problem with a lot of philosophers, a lot of eggheads, a lot of brainiacs, is that they take their subject matter way too seriously, right? Way too seriously. I mean, he poured his soul into this, and at the end of the day, what did he really prove or demonstrate? Not a lot, unless you are a really religious person or a fanatic or a zealot, right? But otherwise, if you are let's call it a non-believer, or like me, I'm a person that does not have the patience for religion, right? And Kierkegaard, in this book, repeats again and again, that the highest passion in life for a person is his faith, his personal faith, his personal relationship with God. He keeps mentioning these nights of faith and these nights of resignation, etc. And, I don't agree with that, right? I've never been a fan of religion for obvious reasons. We're not going to get too deep into this subject, but yet again, I think, as with, certain philosophies, certain ideas, uh, religion suffers from the same illness, which is that most people, for some reason, take it way too seriously, right? And I agree. If you want to believe, if you want to have a faith, I agree. I think that it should be a completely personal, intimate uh, thing, and it should never leave your interior. It should be internal. Your relationship with whatever imaginary creature you want to believe in, right? So it's interesting to see someone being so fervent and trying to convince, us the readers, etc., that, the highest passion is faith, and etc. And this is something I really do not agree with, because I do not take, any faith or any religious or any religion. I don't take them seriously because, of course, uh, in my case, religion in general has nothing to offer, right? To me, religion has absolutely nothing to offer, and I'm still puzzled as to why someone so, obviously incredibly intelligent like Kierkegaard, uh, considered that having faith is the most important thing, etc., etc. Of course, he was raised in uh, a religious family. Uh, in the early 1800s, it was a different time, but of course, he was an individual. An individual. He was a free thinker, and it baffles me that a free thinker would choose religion as being on the highest, right? On the highest pedestal. That people should really just occupy themselves with this and then with the rest, right? Which I don't agree with. So, yeah, on one hand, of course, Abraham is a murderer. It did not need such a roundabout explanation. It's clear, but this is a religious motif, and of course, you have to. This book tackles it from a ethical standpoint, etc. Was Abraham justified, etc., etc., etc.? What if this? What if that? And at the end of the day, you know, as far as I'm concerned, all of this is completely, pointless, worthless, meaningless. Let's talk about some fucking scene in the Bible or whatever. It's just, I think we should move on. Not that I'm, criticizing Kierkegaard or whatever, but I'm just saying it's pointless to focus too much on these, what I call, figments of the imagination, fantasies, etc. That is what religion is to me. A bunch of stories, metaphors, whatever. And they were good for a couple of thousand years, right? But now, I think it's time for us to move on, right? Because think about it. Think about it, right? For almost 2,000 years, people believed that Abraham was a hero, etc. What good did that do? Now here comes Kierkegaard, and he demonstrates with pure logic that actually Abraham was a murderer, or a potential murderer if he wasn't, rescued by God, right? And what good did that do? Maybe it made a couple of people think outside the box, but really, it really did not do anything for anyone. I think if you are a reasonable person who operates on logic and common sense, I think by now, you should have the reason to understand that, certain things like a religion, is, miscellaneous. It's there, whatever, but I don't think that it should be taken too seriously. Just like politics and politicians should not be taken too seriously, etc., etc., right? But that's just me, that's my reason. I mean, let me read you what's on the back cover. You know, regarded as the father of existentialism, Kierkegaard transformed philosophy with his conviction that we must all create our own nature. In this great work of religious anxiety, he argues that a true understanding of God can only be attained by making a personal leap of faith. Now, that sounds great, right? But here's what I have a problem with. And listen, I hope that nobody's offended that that I'm not, how should I say this, that I'm not praising religion, right? It's whatever. It's just my opinion on the matter. It's my choice, right? You do you, I do me, right? So here he says, Kierkegaard argues that a true understanding of God can only be attained by making a personal leap of faith, right? So here's my question. Did Kierkegaard ever consider that maybe there might be a couple of people among us that do not want to understand God, right? I do not want to have a true understanding of God. Actually, I don't really care about God. And I don't really want to have anything to do with God, right? And most of all, I really don't want to understand God in any way, shape, or form. And I really don't want to make a leap of faith to try to understand God, right? Because me and God, we don't have anything in common, right? And maybe you feel the same. Why not? Right? This is a completely different conversation, right? But if you make a statement, you also have to assume that there's always going to be somebody who has an opposite, or opposing opinion on the matter. So here, Kierkegaard says that you have to make a leap of faith to truly understand God. And, I don't really feel the need to understand God, you know? And my question is, why would anybody want to understand God? God is silence, period. That is all that God is, you know? And you can make all the arguments in the world, fine, right? But I don't get why, this late in the game that is life, you know, I'm puzzled and perplexed why people are still simping for God and are trying to understand God and are trying to make leaps of faith to understand, to have the true understanding of God, you know. But if you feel that way, then it's fine, right? It just doesn't vibe with me, right? Because I don't understand it, right? I just, how should I say this? I am completely indifferent to the existence of God, and if it is proven beyond any doubt that God truly exists, right, through science and logic, I still would be exactly the same, completely indifferent, right? It's just me. I don't know. Religion was never my thing. Um, Unfortunately, to me, religion seems dead set on creating, you know, uh, mindless, obedient robots on a conveyor belt. That is what religion seems to me. And let me tell you, going to a fancy building every Sunday will not shorten the distance between you and your deity. That's just my, that's just my take on this subject. Because think about it. We've all heard it. You gotta have faith. You gotta believe right? All of us have to believe in God, but have you ever asked yourself this question, right? So we have to believe in God, but does God believe in us, right? I am certain that most people never posed this question. It never even crossed their mind, right? So people have faith in God. People believe in God, but does God believe in you? Does God have faith in humanity? I don't know, right? Because God is silence, right? And I don't really want to know what God has to say on this matter. Does he believe in us? Does he have faith in us? And if he doesn't have faith in us, right? In what does God believe? In what does God place his faith? Does he have a faith in something, right? Or is God exempt, excused from having a faith? Only we have to have a faith in him, right? So yeah, these are a couple of questions. Let's have a little fun. Let's lighten up. But I've always liked this. Let's call it a little satirical, sarcastic. What you might call it? It's a question, right? When somebody says that he or she believes in God, I immediately say, okay, so you believe in God, but does God believe in you? And why should God believe in anything or in anyone, right? Etc., etc., right? Anyway, let's continue. Still on the back cover. Throughout history, some books have changed the world, no doubt about it. They have transformed the way we see ourselves and each other. They have inspired debate, dissent, war, and revolution. They have enlightened, outraged, provoked, and comforted. They have enriched lives and destroyed them. Now Penguin Books brings you the works of the great thinkers, pioneers, radicals, and visionaries whose ideas shook civilization and helped make us who we are. That's pretty good. Now I'm gonna have to tell you this because this is a half truth, right? So throughout history, some books have changed the world. Uh, Unless you're talking about books like the Bible and any other let's call it religious document or text, this is completely not true, right? Because we understand that throughout the ages, throughout the eons, most people do not read, never will read, and have never read, right? And I guess in the past, of course, there was a larger percentage of people that read, but still, the majority of the population throughout history has never touched a book, right? So, this proves that, books do not change the world, because that obviously, through logic, implies that most of the world reads, which is not true, right? Throughout history, books have done one thing and one thing only. They have stirred, and they have affected, and they have changed individuals. Never a large body of people. Never the world. Okay? Never the world. It's always about the individual, because reading a book is an individual matter. Okay? Alright, they have transformed the way we see ourselves. Probably, but I think your average reader has a very high opinion of himself or herself. So, I'm talking about this, our current timeline. So, today, most people have a very high opinion of themselves. So, I don't think that they can be changed how they see themselves cannot really be altered. And in today's world, especially not by a book, no matter how good the book is, right? They have inspired debate, the Cent War Revolution, probably, but yet again, all of these, debates, wars, revolutions, they were sparked because certain, you know, minority groups, read the book. The, some books sparked, revolutions and dissent and outrage because only a very limited amount of people read it, right? Yet again, I have to make this repetition. Most people do not read, they have never read, and they will never read. So, okay, when you say that certain books affected and influenced and changed the world, history, started wars and revolutions, this was because a minimal group of people read them, which usually turns out to be intellectuals, elites, politicians, royalty, etc. Never, the hoi polloi, the riffraff, because the riffraff don't care about big ideas, okay? They have enriched lives and destroyed them. True, maybe. But yet again, I have to say this. In today's world, I don't think a philosophical work or what have you is gonna affect somebody in such a way that it will destroy their lives. I don't think that's possible, right? Even if somebody reads these tremendous works, these amazing books, I don't think that they will be that affected by it, right? Maybe because in today's world, a lot of people are, too self-absorbed, too narcissistic, etc. And let me get a few quotes in, because there are really, and listen, what really confused me about Fear and Trembling is because I went on Goodreads and I saw some of Søren's quotes, and they were like top tier, 10 out of 10, amazing. Like, amazing. Like, if you read his quotes, if you're like me, you're gonna say this guy is amazing. And he is. But when you start reading his damn books, you're like, oh, what's going on here, buddy? Right? So his quotes, carefully picked, are tremendous beyond anything, right? Pure nihilism, pure negativity, etc., 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 which I really enjoy, by the way. But then you tackle his work, right? And it's just page after page of you trying to maintain that concentration, because I mean, look, this page has just two sentences, and these two sentences are two paragraphs, right? It's hard. The way he expresses himself, sometimes it is rigid, it is mechanical, and it is difficult to keep up, to maintain that focus, right? And I should say, for beginners or for readers that don't really read consistently every day or so, this book might be too much. And I read every day, with few exceptions, and this book, the way that it is written, uh, it was an obstacle. And like I said, I dropped it the first time because it was just so impossible, right? His style, right? But anyway, okay, so here is a quote that I really liked. What I intend now is to extract from the story of Abraham its dialectical element in the form of problemata, in order to see how monstrous a paradox faith is. A paradox capable of making a murder into a holy act, well-pleasing to God. A paradox which gives Isaac back to Abraham, which no thought can grasp, because faith begins precisely where thinking leaves off. So this is incredible insight, because he understands that faith is a paradox, an absurd one, right? And everything in any religious text of any kind is one sentence and then after it a contradiction of the previous, right? But even if he's so aware of it, he still believes that the highest passion is faith. But why I love this quote so much is that it's so brilliant, because it exposes, the logic of religion so beautifully, right? So why does he focus on the problem of Abraham and Isaac so much? Because in order to see how monstrous a paradox faith is, a paradox capable of making a murder into a holy act, and I would say a murderer into a hero, well-pleasing to God, a paradox which gives Isaac back to Abraham, which no thought can grasp, because, and listen to this again, because no one can grasp this thought, because faith begins precisely where thinking leaves off. And that should have been enough. That to me is, case closed, right? He keeps mentioning in the book, he gives his perspectives on the matter of Abraham, and at the end of each, perspective, he says, if this is true, then Abraham is done for. And I believe, yes, Abraham is done for, because obviously, logic, it's simple. I mean, if you can overlook the difficult read that it is going to be, and if you're going to tolerate its meandering and its tangents, then this will be an enjoyable book, right? Because like I said, Kierkegaard is sharp AF, right? He is sharp. Okay, when he wants to, when he's not fucking around, he just nails it on the coffin. No problem, no effort. Okay, straight away. And this is about it. That's about it. You should definitely read this book. But here's, I'm gonna end this video with let's call it a philosophical discussion, or whatever you wanna call it. I've never been a fan of gods, never. But I always like to consider, the hypocrisy involved of people who defend, religions and gods. Right? Because think about it. And this is how monstrous this is. Because listen, God wanted to test Abraham's faith. So he said, okay, take your son, travel for 3 days, and then, sacrifice him for me to prove your faith. Right? And you might say, well, yeah, that's pretty much what happened. But I have a problem with it. And it's not because of the sacrifice, because of course it is bizarre that you would have to sacrifice a human being to God to prove your faith. But that is not what bothers me the most. And maybe you have not thought about this. Now, here is a demonstration of pure logic. Right? What is God? God is an omnipresent, omniscient, omnipotent. So God is everywhere. God is everything. God can do everything, anything, and God knows everything. God knows everything, right? So tell me why God had to put on this theater piece, because of course God knew how Abraham and Isaac's story would end, because he's God. He already knows that Abraham is indeed gonna sacrifice Isaac in God's name to prove his faith, because God already knows. So why does he have to send Abraham for 3 days, right, and then stop him? Why does he have to do this? Because he already knows. God already knows. God knows that I'm gonna fart 5 minutes from now, right? God knew that Abraham would indeed sacrifice Isaac, right? So God allowed Abraham to go through this crazy, like, this crazy whirlwind of emotion. Oh boy, I'm gonna sacrifice my son. It's crazy, right? Can you imagine the turmoil, the emotional fucking carnage that happens? This is an old man, and he was ordered by God to kill his son, right? And God allowed this to happen, even though God knew that Abraham would indeed sacrifice his son. God knew. And he let it happen. He let this old man suffer, mental and emotional turmoil, hellish fire, because he had to sacrifice his son. So during these 3 days, Abraham nearly lost all of his marbles. Always thinking with anxiety, I'm going to kill my son, but this is my only son, but God ordered me to. But you understand what I'm saying? So God allowed this to happen. This mental anguish and agony brought upon Abraham for no reason whatsoever, because God already knew the outcome. Because God is God, bro. Right? So this is why I never liked gods. Is God just bored? That's what I want to know. Is God just bored? Because that would explain a lot of things. Or does God simply just not give a fuck? Because that would explain a lot of things also. And I don't want to hear, arguments about, there's this great plan, right? I don't want to hear it. And another example of pure logic, you know, uh, in Genesis, it is said, there was nothing, there was void, and then God created everything, the world, yada yada. You get it. And then it says, God created the world and the animals, etc., etc., and God saw that it was good. And of course, if you have common sense, your first question will be, huh? Right? Because again, what is God? God is all knowing. God knows everything in advance. Omniscient, omnipresent, omnipotent. So how come God creates something and afterwards concludes that it is good? It doesn't make any sense, right? So God had to create something, and after it was created, afterwards he decided that what he had created was good. This does not make sense, right? This is not something that a God would do. This is an extremely human trait, right? This is not the trait of a God. Something that is infinite and boundless and eternal would never create something and then, decide that it is good or not. God already knows that what he is going to create will be good. Okay? I mean, pure logic, right? Another example, and we're just having fun here, right? I'm not attacking anybody's religion. This is just for the sake of argument, to lighten the load, have a laugh, have a discussion, and to prove to you that most believers do not operate under under the guise of logic. It's simple, because they have never thought about the things that I'm telling you right now. Another example, in the Garden of Eden, we have Adam and Eve, and they're fucking around, and they're told, you can eat out of every tree except this tree of good and evil, whatever, right? And then wouldn't you know, the fucking serpent comes around and seduces Eve, and they all eat the apple, etc. And you're telling me that God, in his own Garden of Eden, did not know that these two fuckers will eat the apple. He didn't know in advance that these two clowns were going to eat the apple. Right? Because God is God. He already knew. Who do you think allowed the serpent to come into the Garden of Evil? Of course it was God, bruh. So God planned this out from beginning to end, and then after these clowns ate from the apple, God comes around and says, yo, Adam and Eve, where are you? Where you hiding, bruh? Did you eat from my fucking tree of knowledge, bruh? I mean, this guy, God, he's an actor. What do you mean? He is asking Adam and Eve, who are hiding from his wrath, he is pretending, he is play acting. Why is he asking them if they ate from the apple? Of course he knows already. Right? He already knows, so why is he putting on this act? It's so disgusting. Right? This is what I always hated about any type of religion. Right? What do you mean you're gonna pretend and you're putting on this theater piece when you already know in advance? For what reason? For what goal? I mean, to torment, your creations that are in your likeness? I don't know. It's bizarre to me, right? It's bizarre to me. Another, and this is going to be the final piece of logic, all right? So we have Genesis in the Bible. And in Genesis, we are told how God created everything in existence because there was nothing beforehand. So here's my question. Like, who was there to record all of this, right? Like, who was sitting there writing all of this down? So, there was no form, and there was the void, and then there was water, and then the first thing was the word, and then the light. Who was there, taking notes? Did God create a fucking, a notary, right? Or 1,000 years later, did God just go to somebody and told them, okay, you gotta write this down. This is how I created the fucking universe, bruh. So there was nothing, all right. But so I was bored, and then I like let there be light and shit. And this guy was writing it down. Like, who was there present when God was creating the universe? Okay, simple logic. And this is the problem with religion, faith as a whole, that logic is never applied. The inconsistencies, the contradictions, they just stare you in the face. And most believers ignore them completely as if they're brain dead. Right? As if they're brain dead. Like Søren Kierkegaard said, thinking ends when faith begins, or something like that. Let's repeat that one last time, if we can. That's about it. Faith begins precisely when thinking ends, or vice versa. Uh, thinking ends where faith begins, however you want it, right? That's about it, right? Always go for logic, even if you are a religious person of whatever faith and denomination, right? Always apply logic, because otherwise, if you don't think for yourself, right, you can be easily manipulated, and history shows that those who choose not to think get manipulated very easily, right? So this has been Fear and Trembling by Søren Kierkegaard, right? If you didn't know, I'm a writer myself. I got a couple of books on Amazon. If you want to support your boy, the link will be in the description down below. Thanks for watching. See ya!